This is the footage of the egg-shaped UAP that News Nation released yesterday during their interview with Jake Barber. And this is my best attempt at explaining what we are and are not looking at. And no, I'm not claiming to be an expert, and yes, I am allowed to change my mind if new information becomes available. First, the shape. It definitely looks like an egg that bears a striking resemblance to this 17-foot-long aerostat in color, shape, and size. However, the egg appears to maintain the integrity of its ovoid shape despite the fact that it has been secured to the lifting basket and rigging that encases it. And if you compare that to the aerostat in this picture, you can clearly see that it yields to any pressure it encounters from the straps or the stand that it's sitting on. Next, let's take a look at the techniques they use to lift the egg. I'll preface this section by stating that while I'm not an expert in all things hoisting and rigging, I literally oversaw the lifting operations for an entire Air Force base as a civilian contractor for several years, including running the calculations for the lifting plans that we had to submit to Air Force leadership, so I'm not a novice either. Now, assuming that the egg was not conveniently equipped with pick points above its center of gravity, the first step would be to secure the egg with something that does have pick points. In this situation, it appears that they used a large, wide, rectangular lifting strap, probably made of nylon, and completely wrapped it around the egg and then secured it back to itself so that the egg couldn't move around within the strap. To properly secure the load, they'd have to remove any slack from the string, and they'd probably do so by a come-along or a turnbuckle. And it's reasonable to assume that if this technique was used on an aerostat, the shell would deflect anywhere that the rigging came in contact with it, similar to what we saw when it was on the truck. Once the egg is secured with the blanket, which I'm assuming is equipped with 4 pick points, those pick points would be connected to 4 slings, which would then be connected to a single shackle, which would then be connected to the 150-foot load line. And for reference, you can see the slings right here. This configuration will keep it from tipping back and forth, but it wouldn't keep it from spinning around the axis of the cable. The next clue I'm going to focus on is the lack of a ground crew to receive the object. Why isn't anyone there? Well, based on the shadow, it appears that there is a ground crew somewhere off to the left of the screen. So if they're already there, why aren't they trying to stop it from rolling over if it's such precious cargo? Or why didn't they put some blocking on the ground to limit the amount that it could roll? Well, if they knew for certain that it had to roll, they wouldn't want to be close to it. And I speculate that they did know that it was going to roll because of the way that they connected it to the blanket in the beginning. If the center of gravity of the object isn't in the dead center of the egg, it would want to roll over to where the heavy side is facing down, because gravity. Visualize taping a weight to a beach ball and you'll understand what I'm trying to say. Therefore, I suspect that they put a blanket over the top of the object and secured it to itself from underneath. Then, when the helicopter picked it up, it would rotate over and lift up. In this orientation, the egg would be top-heavy, but the 4 slings would prevent it from being able to rotate to right itself. Next, as they transport the egg to the loading site, notice how the cable moves constantly, but the egg itself stays steady and smooth. This behavior is what you would expect to see if a cable was attached to a heavy object. But if it was a light object attached to a cable suspended from a helicopter, you would think that the cable's movement would also influence the movement of the object, and we're not seeing that here. Next, when they set the egg down, they would have done so while it was in an unbalanced top-heavy position. Next, gravity would kick in and want to roll it over 180 degrees to the position that the ground crew originally found it in. At least that's what it would do if it was on a relatively solid, rigid surface. If it was a softer, spongier surface, the resistance that it encountered would probably stop it from rotating a full 180 degrees. Think about rolling a bowling ball across your mattress versus down a bowling alley. So let's go ahead and talk about what it landed on. Based on the B-reel footage that they used when Barber was talking about the range, as well as a few other clues, I suspect that this event took place in the American Southwest. And the ground at the landing zone appears to corroborate this because the surface looks very solid and rocky. Similar to a common soil condition in the Southwest called caliche, which is almost as hard as concrete. But what doesn't make sense to me is that they didn't put bumpers around the object when they set it down to limit the amount that it could roll. Because if this cargo is as precious as they're making it out to be, you wouldn't want to let it roll 100 degrees just to turn around, come back with a crane, and roll it another 180 degrees to pick it back up and set it on a truck. Another possible explanation for why you don't see a ground crew at the landing zone is that maybe the object is emitting something like radiation or something else that's harmful for humans, so you'd want to stay away from it. And if that's the case, I feel really bad for the poor souls that had to throw the blanket over it and secure it in the first place. So in conclusion, I'm currently under the impression that the object is rigid, it's fairly heavy, and that the center of gravity of the object is not in the dead center of the egg.